Michelle, yesterday you were able to share with us the importance of building trust, um, the basic human needs that are important to consider when building trust. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how to build that trust with activities that
Yes.
can be done with one another.
Yeah, and this does play on what we talked about yesterday for sure. But I thought it would be nice to go over some different ideas and some different activities that you could use in these activities. You could use in group work. You could use them in a classroom. You could use them with individuals or working with families. That's where my background comes from, working with families. So, but I think there's a lot of different applications. I know, Amy, I like when I go to a conference or go to a training, I like coming away with some practical tools.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really like these activities because sometimes it's just a really great get to know you exercise, but also very beneficial that guides your future work with the family. It guides some introspection for a family or a parent, whoever you're working with, to think about, that impacts their everyday decision and what their values are.
Yeah. Amy, you're right. I think there are a lot of different uses for these activities beyond just trust building and engaging.
Yeah.
That's their intention, but I think you really can get to know someone on a much deeper level in this kind of activity, as well as facilitating belonging and connectedness in groups and families by these kind of activities. So they really do, they are multifaceted and have multi-purposes to them.
Absolutely.
When I chose these activities, I tried to pick activities that didn't require a lot of materials that you have to go out and buy. So I'm using materials that are inexpensive so that we can create our own tools for our toolbox, because I know there's a lot of great therapeutic games and things like that out there that you can purchase, but most of us, I like the kind of things that I can create myself.
Right.
So the first one, for example, I use a beach ball, which is something that you can buy those at the dollar store, or they're very inexpensive, vinyl beach balls, and you can reuse them and use them for a lot of different things.
Sure.
I have a lot of different activities I use those for, but primarily the first activity is going to be about storytelling. And storytelling is a wonderful tool for engagement because it's an opportunity for validation. And when someone tells you their story, then you have a perfect opportunity to validate their experience, their feelings, their needs. And we do that by reflecting back. And there's lots of ways to create a context in which people can tell their stories. I've used story starter cards, like where they have a sentence and they have to finish the sentence. And that's a nice way to do it. This is just one activity that I'm going to show you that I like to do in order to get those stories starting, using feelings. And like I said, I use a beach ball. And let me just, since we were in a live training, I would have us all participate and play this. But since we can't do that, I'm just going to show you go over a slideshow that demonstrates the activity, how to set it up, and what it looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you.
To prepare for this activity, write 12 emotion words that express an unmet need onto a beach ball. And you'll find a list of words to choose from in your handouts. Begin this activity by tossing the ball from one person to the next. The first person catches the ball and reads the feeling that their right thumb is touching. They then share a story about a time that they felt that way while the others in the group listen. When they toss the ball to the next person, that person reflects back the feeling and the need. So you felt frustrated because you needed help with your math homework. And then the game continues. You could also use this activity to practice iMessages. So after sharing their story, the first person uses an iMessage. And then the next person reflects what they just heard.
Michelle, I really like the application of using the beach ball because I know that using beach balls are pretty common in not only therapeutic relationships and settings, but just any type of teamwork building or leadership activities. And so I think it's very helpful for providers to come up with different ways to use that. It's something common that can be accessed. It's easily accessible, like you said, it's not expensive. And being able to use that in different ways, I think it's helpful. And I really like that activity because of the reframing that happens when the ball is thrown back, and that people can really hear how that emotion connects to a situation that they experience. And practice saying that.
And that's it. It's really just creating opportunities to be able to validate and reflect. And the beach ball is just a tool to be able to do that. I do think there is something about the tossing back and forth that's very attachment forming or trust building.
Right.
But you could certainly do this activity in other ways without using a beach ball. It's really just giving people an opportunity to share stories. And you could also, another variation, Amy, is you could do the same activity and have some positive feelings and do the same thing. I like doing feelings that represent needs because it creates a greater opportunity for reflection. But certainly you could mix up the emotions and use some more positive emotions in that same activity.
Well, I think being physically active, research talks about how our brain remembers things. Like, for example, if we write down notes, when you're studying, I think by having a physical activity of tossing the beach ball and the rephrasing verbally out loud, that helps cement the understanding of the activity. So that's great.
I use a lot of these activities in my trainings, these type of activities.
Sure.
So the next activity is another one that you can create. It's a value identification activity. Identifying values is very important for so many different things. It's part of our identity, and it's something that we want to affirm. Going back to the trust building we talked about yesterday, there are lots of different value identification activities out there. This one uses value cards. And we talked about this before, Amy. You can purchase value cards. You can go online and find them. I don't think that's necessary. Frankly, I go buy a pack of index cards and cut them in half and just get a list of values that you can find on the internet and create your own. Or if you don't have good handwriting, I use, you could find the squares with the different values on, or you could create that as a handout, print it out and cut it up. You can laminate it or not laminate it. I usually don't bother laminating things because the less time I put into the deck of cards that I use for this activity, the more likely I will be to just give it away to the family, because sometimes they really like it. So I say, here, you can have a deck of value cards. So they don't have to be fancy or expensive. But
I've also done it with blank cards and allowing families to kind of write what their own value is. And I always think that's a unique perspective too, something that maybe wasn't represented on another card or that you wouldn't have thought of. So
I think that's a great idea. So just so that the participants know what we're talking about, I have a little demo video to show you the activity.
Great.
Create your deck of value cards. A good-sized deck should have about 50 or so value cards. And again, you could find these on the internet. There's a lot of good lists of value cards if you just search for values or value list. Then you place the 4 category cards on the table or floor. You're going to need plenty of room to do this activity. Ask the person to shuffle through the deck and place each value card directly under the category that would best describe each value. You want to encourage them to think about what each value means to them and is it important to them. When they're finished sorting through the entire deck, ask them to comment on the process. Was it difficult, easy? Were there any cards that should be added to the deck? Then you want to ask them to pick their top 5 or 10 values from the very important pile and rank them in order. Give them time to define each of the top 5 or 10 values and explain why they're important to them. If others are present, you can give them time to ask questions or comments at the end, but don't allow anyone to argue about what someone else's values should be. Remember that a person's values are their own and they're not disputable. The purpose of this activity is to create an opportunity to affirm their values. So Amy, like I said before, this is just one activity. Some of you might be familiar with it for identifying values. There's lots of other ways or activities that you can use to help people reflect on what their values are and to help them prioritize their values.
You know, I really like the value cards activity because it really just gives that opportunity for families to reflect themselves on what's important to them.
You know, Amy, in my experience, it also promotes conversation that maybe wouldn't happen otherwise. There's something about when you use cards, it's less intimidating.
Absolutely.
Because you're not making eye contact directly with them. And so it's easier for them to share when they have an activity and something to do with their hand.
I agree. I agree.
So the next activity that I want to share today, and all of these, by the way, you have in your handouts. So hopefully you've downloaded the handouts. The next activity is called affiliation mapping. And so I included an affiliation map in your handout, a blank one that you could use. And this is, again, something to help promote and reinforce the importance of affiliations and to open up an opportunity where someone can talk about their affiliations and the importance of that in their life and how that's a reflection of their values. So one thing I want to point out, and I think I'll talk about this a little more, I'll reiterate this point, but when we're talking about affiliations, it doesn't have to be a formal group. It could be just something that you identify with.
Right.
A group you identify with. So it's really about identity. First, have them write their name in the center box. Identify groups or communities that they belong to, and this can include family, friend groups, teams like sports teams, clubs, hobby groups, cultural groups, political or civic groups, churches, or a profession. An affiliation doesn't have to be a formal group with an official membership. It can be any group whose values and goals you identify or align with. So for each group you identify, you first want to list the benefits of being affiliated with that group. And you write those out on the directional arrow pointing towards the center box. And so whatever is identified is the benefits of belonging to that particular group. Then you want to list how they contribute to that group. And you put that on the other directional arrow that's pointing away from the center. Again, all the groups that we affiliate with, some of them have benefits for us, but we also make contributions. That's part of belonging. Next, you want to list out any shared values that the individual shares with that group or any shared goals. And you want to continue on for each group that they identify as feeling like they belong to, making sure we list both the benefits and the contributions as well as those shared values. Continue on. You don't have to come up with 6 different groups, but you want to encourage as many as you can think of. Again, it doesn't have to be a formal group. It could just be any group that you feel that you identify with, that you feel you have shared values or goals with. This is an opportunity for you to engage them in a conversation that not only affirms their identity, values, and contributions, but it acknowledges the importance of the need to belong and creates an environment of acceptance.
Michelle, thank you for sharing those activities. I like that they're easy but meaningful. And it's an opportunity to kind of have some fun with that, who you're working with. It helps build up your trust with that family or with that person, and ultimately helps them have some increased understanding of themselves and their own values or situations that have occurred with them. So I'm wondering if you can talk with me a little bit about the difference between affiliation mapping and an eco map, because I know many of our viewers might be familiar with eco maps, and I noticed that you went over the affiliation map.
Yes, yeah, they are similar. They have different purposes. In an eco map, you're identifying what that support network is for the purpose of growing that support network, which is a very important thing to do. In affiliation mapping, it's really about identity, and being able to affirm that identity and the purpose for affiliations. So an affiliation doesn't need to be a person or a group. It could be a cultural identity, or or a group in the sense that I identify who you identify as. I could, maybe female entrepreneurs is a group that I identify with, and I might not formally belong to a group, but I feel like that's part of my identity. And so affiliations, they're a little different than groups. There's certainly some crossover between the two, but I think the other difference is the purpose. This is really about validating an identity. You certainly recognize the importance of those affiliations, and they're a part of who you are. It's another way it's in a sense also a value identification activity. It's an affirmation activity. It's kind of everything rolled into one.
Sure. Well, Michelle, I appreciate you going over these activities today on ways to build trust. I really appreciate all of them because, as I said, this is the opportunity where I think activities generate some deeper meaning for participants. And as you said, it's less intimidating. It's not necessarily a question where you're expecting some open, transparent response without trust having already been built. And it's just an opportunity to have some fun, but get to know who you're working with, and for them to do some deep introspection on what impacts them day to day,
right?
What guides them.
Yeah. And I hope our participants, if you haven't done these activities before, give it a try and be creative and come up with your own ways to create that safe space and that trust building opportunities.
All right. Well, thank you to our viewers, and we hope this is helpful for you today.
Thank you.